Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss yet another report suggesting that Rishi Sunak will be thinking about November 2024 as the intended date for the general election. Now, I think that would be mad, but let us go through the thinking and what the pros and cons would be for both the Conservatives as well as Labour. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So before I begin, of course, just because Rishi Sunak is letting it known, or it is being known, that he's thinking about November 2024, it could just be a ruse to try and wrong foot Labour. We have to bear that in mind. But let us go with it. So Bloomberg are reporting that Sunak is probably looking at next November for the general election. That would be 16 months' time. And are basing the report on someone they describe as being familiar with his thinking. Now, the stated reasons are that inflation will be much lower and that they'll be able to demonstrate progress on healthcare and immigration. Now, the thinking on these lines is not crazy. I mean, let's go through them one at a time. First, inflation, inevitably, without the government doing anything at all, which is just as well because they're not doing anything at all. Inflation will be lower next year than this. Even last autumn, projections were showing that the UK would have the highest inflation in the G7 over the following 3 years, but that it would still fall year on year. Where the Tories may face a problem is in how voters feel about it, because it's really this simple. If people's incomes keeps rising below the level of inflation, and I mean their personal inflation, and you know the headline figures of inflation use CPI, that doesn't include your mortgage or rent. But people's personal inflation, what they feel in their pocket, that takes everything into account. And if people's incomes, if the income increase, the pay rise each year is below the level of their inflation, then their budgets are going to carry on being squeezed. So even if inflation has fallen by next November to something more manageable, and of course it will have, people will still be in a worse position as compared to now. The strategic thinking here is that they hope to be in a position whereby they can claim to people that things are getting better. The usual Tory dodge, they do it so often, I really can't understand why people fall for it. Oh, we had the tough times, lads, the tough times, but we've got through it by pluck and gumption. And now the good times are rolling. Oh, but don't vote Labour, otherwise it gets turned off immediately. But the overall damage will be such that they will still lose. And then it'll be Labour benefiting from what will be a slightly better economic situation, because in a year's time, the economy will be in a better position. Still dire, but less dire. Second's healthcare. Now, I am quite dubious about this one. I can sort of see it with the inflation. Healthcare, I'm not sure. There's a lot of ifs and buts. See, they're not actually doing anything to help ease the problems in the NHS. On the contrary, they're trying to break it with the limited time they have available. However, it could certainly be argued that if they can see the strikes dwindle over the rest of this year, and that's a big if, and not repeated next year, another big if, which remains to be seen, like I say, then they might be able to publish better looking figures. Might. The figures will still be terrible, of course, but they won't be comparing the figures with when Labour were last in power. That'd be ridiculous. They'll be comparing it during the strike-ridden period of late 2022 and early 2023 to make them look good by comparison. Still, it's not clear that the figures will look significantly better, nor is it clear that they'll be able to draw a line under the strikes at all. Additionally, just as with inflation, what's more important than the data is how people feel. If people feel that they don't have proper access to healthcare, not many are going to be bowled over by a graph. Third is immigration. Now, they can certainly post better looking figures here, absolutely. The latest immigration figures were significantly boosted by a refugee influx from Hong Kong and Ukraine. Those will naturally disappear from the figures, which would be the most recent if Sunak held on for autumn 2024. All of the things being equal, he will be able to post better looking immigration figures next year. Right. In terms of other impacts, it's likely that the government are going to need to issue more visas. So the economic migration, which is what seems to upset the gammons, that will actually increase. But they'll hide it away in the headline figures. The illegal migration bill, which has passed this week. Now, you might think that will reduce the asylum figures. By passing that, we've sacrificed our national humanity for the sake of a few Tory votes. But asylum is a tiny part of the overall immigration figures, so I'm not sure what they expect to gain from it other than pleasing the more sadistic members of their ranks. And given that Reform UK will be aiming to leverage immigration for all it's worth, because what else have they got? Expect Gammon News to be poking all sorts of holes in the government's figures next year. However, I will not deny that these three issues are important to various groups of Conservative voters and that Rishi Sunak may be able to present a better case for all three if he waits until autumn 2024. We have to bear in mind, when we look at, for example, the by-election results this week, when we look at the polling, there's a lot of don't knows there. And quite a number of those don't knows are really Conservative voters. They're not going to vote Labour. They're not going to vote Lib Dem. But at the moment, they're not voting for anyone. But come the election, some will hold their nose and vote Conservative. Some won't. Plenty will stay away. What these are about, this waiting till autumn 2024, if that is a genuine plan, it will be about persuading more of those don't knows to go, well, it's eased a little bit. I am prepared to hold my nose and vote Tory. But it is worth bearing in mind there are some other factors. It's not, if you just look at these three factors, you can say, okay, I can see that. But there's more factors. First, he's backing policies which might trigger a recession. Now, a recession is not certain, of course, if inflation falls quickly enough to persuade the Bank of England to stop ramping up interest rates higher and higher, then we may avoid it. The economy will be stagnant. I mean, in reality, there's no difference between a 0.1% contraction over 2 quarters, which is a recession, and 0.1% growth over 2 quarters, which is growth. But with the first one, that recession, the media use that dreaded word recession, and everyone loses their minds. If Sunak triggers a recession, it's going to make it very hard to claim to be any sort of economically competent Prime Minister. And this will be a bad one because although it won't be very deep or last very long, recessions go, it'll be a blip. He's backed it. His Chancellor has backed the idea that they've both said that they're comfortable with the idea of a recession hitting as an acceptable price to pay for lower inflation. Well, that's not how many people might see it. Second, with each passing month, more and more people are being presented with unaffordable mortgage repayments as their fixed rate terms come to an end and they take up new ones if they can afford them. And the thing is, this is not something that's going to get better next year. Like, interest rates may well come down next year, but the situation doesn't get better because some voters are losing their homes. If they've lost their homes, they've lost their homes. The fact that interest rates come down next year, that's not going to impress them. In fact, it might make them angrier. Some will have had to downsize. Some have already had to downsize. Some will have to do so before those interest rates come down. Again, they'll have effectively lost their home. At least they've still got one, but not the one they had that they liked. Some others will have to remortgage in order to get through this. Well, that means over the longer term, paying much more in interest rates. All of these people will be upset with the Tories, and that upset's not going to abate if the situation is better nominally by 2024 November, because the damage will have been done to those people. Third, they're giving more time for Labour to get stronger and the Tories to get weaker. Robert Buckland, I think it was. I've been watching a few little exchanges on clips of TV interviews and so on. I think it was Robert Buckland, who's a former Tory minister, was having a bit of a pop on television with someone from Labour related to the by-elections, in which he said of his Labour compatriot, "You're only just getting the hang of being in opposition. You're not ready for government." I thought, quite a good line. I think the country would disagree with him, though. But there is a point within the attack line. Labour have completely reformed over the past few years. So they are still easing themselves into this new mode. But given more time, surely they're going to give themselves the opportunity to get out and spread that message, to become more comfortable spreading that message. They might even start to use outlets for their message that they've so far ignored. I don't hold my breath. Like, Keir Starmer could take part in an interview on this channel and it'll get more views than an entire month of the typical views he gets on the official Labour channel. But regardless, they will inevitably sharpen up their pitch, improve their polling techniques, and have more conversations out and about throughout the country. But this works in reverse for the Tories because people are sick of it. They're sick of the fact they're not doing anything. They're wanting a general election now, and the longer the Tories deny them that general election, the more angry they get. The Tories can hardly go another week without another scandal. We're already looking at 2 more probable by-elections for Sunak to face, both of which are vulnerable. But there's always another investigation coming up, isn't there? There's always another investigation. More dodgy dealing to emerge, especially as Tory MPs now know they've got limited time. So if anything, it might prompt them to be even more reckless with their lobbying behaviour. Grab as much cash as they can quickly. Fourth will be the COVID inquiry. There are weekly revelations. They're often getting lost in amongst the other scandals in the news, but that's fine. Each week that passes is another chance for something really spicy to emerge. Imagine what's going to emerge given another 16 months before the election. Another 16 months of COVID inquiry revelations. There's got to be a few good ones in there. And from Labour's point of view, there are advantages to waiting longer for power. I'm being honest, concerned. I'd rather it was sort of nowish. It means another year of terrible legislation, another year of fatally weakening the NHS. But there is a silver lining as well, because we can't control when the election is. Only Rishi Sunak can decide that, and the Tories. An election in November means Labour can implement their budget sooner. New tax rules are applied from April, so having an election in November means waiting less time than having one in May. The economy will have recovered a little as well. Yes, this might win the Tories a few more votes back, but not enough to make a material difference. But it does make a positive difference to Labour's first budget. The global economy should also be recovering, meaning that anything you can do to help boost exports will boost them by a larger proportion. It will, of course, still be held back by the new trade barriers that we keep imposing on ourselves each year. It's also much close to the time when we need to discuss the trade and cooperation agreement with the EU. Remember, Labour wants to not only kick off with this early, but also discuss a few other things at the same time. The EU don't seem so keen on that, but with an election at the end of 2024, they won't have as long to wait. And they will be using that, as I say, as a springboard for lots of other discussions as well. It may be that if this report is accurate, Tory strategist believes that some things might improve by November 2024, and that even if they still lose, they won't lose as badly. That's possible. But when you look at what's coming, actually, I would say there's every chance that for every metric which improves in this time, another two worsen. Still, you can understand them not wanting to contemplate an election when polling suggests you might win fewer than 100 seats. At this point, maybe we end up with that late election, not because they've made a mistake, but just because they're trapped into it. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.